Episode 1. What the hell is this situation? This? Chung Myung growled, gritting his teeth so hard you'd think he was auditioning to become a diamond cutter. Blood dripped from his clenched fists, because, nothing says bad day like bleeding all over your perfectly good hands. And his body, trembling like a cheap motel bed after a very busy night. The guy was mad enough to turn his hair white, but let's be honest, he was already too far gone to notice that. Red. Everything was red. Not the I'm at a club and they've got mood lighting kind of red. No, this was the I've seen some kind of red. All that was left was death, like serious death. The kind that makes you rethink your career choices. What the hell was the point of all this bloodshed? Chung Myung thought, yanking a sword out of his shoulder like it was a bad splinter. His arm? Gone. Yep, just gone. But hey, he still had legs, right? Only problem? Moving them was a suggestion, not a command. His stomach had a hole so big you could probably host a dinner party inside. But pain? Nah, pain was for wimps. Chung Myung was too busy dealing with a heart full of emotional trauma to worry about that. Sahyung, Jang-moon? His voice cracked as he stared at the lifeless body of Jang-moon, who looked like he'd had a rougher day than someone stuck in line at the DMV. Everyone was dead. All his brothers, sisters, even the annoying guy who probably never returned stuff he borrowed, gone. The Mount Hua Sect's finest had all packed their bags for the afterlife, leaving Chung Myung with a serious case of survivor's guilt. And then, his eyes locked on the reason for all this bloody mess. The heavenly demon himself, sitting there, cool as a cucumber in the middle of a murder scene that would make Quentin Tarantino proud. Seriously, dude? You're just gonna sit there like you're at a damn yoga retreat? The heavenly demon didn't seem fazed. In fact, if a guy could look zen while full of more weapons than a medieval piñata, it was this guy. The sect's best had thrown everything they had at him, but he was still here, hanging on like that stubborn toenail that just won't fall off. Chung Myung gritted his teeth harder. You think you're so cool, don't you? Sitting there with your stupid calm face. Mount Hua Sect. The heavenly demon wheezed. Oh, no, you don't! Chung Myung growled, stomach lurching at the very sound of his sect's name coming out of this guy's mouth. It's unfortunate, disciple of Mount Hua Sect. If only you could live to boast about this, the heavenly demon taunted. Boast? Dude, I can't even boast about getting a good night's sleep, and you want me to brag about this mess? Shut up! The heavenly demon continued like he was delivering his TED Talk. Your sword finally reached me. It took the efforts of so many. Quite the accomplishment. Chung Myung couldn't take it anymore. Accomplishment? Buddy, I'll accomplish something when I shut your trap. One agonizing step at a time, Chung Myung dragged himself towards the dying demon, his blood mixing with the sea of red around him. The heavenly demon sighed like a man who just realized he left his phone charger at home. This isn't the end. The demons will return, and when they do, you'll wish you'd stayed dead. Chung Myung had heard enough. With one final burst of rage, he crushed the heavenly demon's skull like an overripe watermelon. It's over, he muttered, but it didn't feel like it. There was no fanfare, no triumphant victory. It was like finishing a marathon, only to realize you still had to walk home. His vision blurred, but even as he lay dying, Chung Myung couldn't help but look up at the sky, which was still blue, as if to say, oh, you guys are bleeding out down there? Cool, cool. I'm still just going to be up here, being all sky-like. Mount Hua Sect was gone, reduced to a tragic memory, like that one time you tried to ask out your crush and they laughed. Only, bloodier. I'm sorry, Sahyung Jang-moon. Chung Myung whispered. If only he'd trained harder. If only he'd been a little more... Yeah, serious. Like that time, he didn't listen to his elders and sneaked out to explore the world instead of staying disciplined in the sect. But hey, you only live once, right? Or twice, apparently, because just as he was about to drift off to the big plum blossom in the sky, he was yanked back into the world of the living. Hundreds of years later... Wait, what? He was a kid now? A damn kid? What was this, some kind of cosmic joke? Mount Hua Sect has fallen? Chung Myung growled as the reality set in. Fallen? The Plum Blossom Sword Saint is back, baby! Ain't no way I'm letting that stand. And so, with the fire of a man who refuses to let a bad hair day define him, Chung Myung's journey to restore his beloved sect began. But first, there was the little matter of being stuck in the body of a half-starved, scruffy little beggar. Oh, and a beating. A very, very thorough beating. Chung Myung struggled to move after the beating, but eventually he managed to drag himself towards the tent of the beggars. The beggars, still snickering about the previous incident, paid him no attention. He observed their dirty, torn clothes and their disheveled hair. What the hell is this? He knew that something was terribly wrong. The Plum Blossom Sword Saint, the man who once stood at the pinnacle of martial prowess, was now in the body of a beggar. How had he, of all people, ended up like this? Ignoring the soreness in his body, Chung Myung's mind began racing. First things first, figure out the timeline. Chung Myung sat down and pondered the situation. He was too weak to do anything yet, but his mind was still sharp. He needed to gather information. Where was he? And more importantly, when was he? The timeline didn't make any sense. Wasn't I supposed to die after killing that heavenly demon? He rubbed his temples, trying to stave off the headache. But soon enough, a realization hit him like a bamboo stick. Wait a second. His eyes widened in horror. If I'm alive, and this isn't some kind of afterlife, that means... He stood up, wobbling slightly, and whispered to himself in a daze. The heavenly demon is dead, and I'm alive. I'm alive! But before he could fully comprehend the situation, a loud growl interrupted his thoughts. His stomach rumbled fiercely, reminding him of his current predicament. Damn it! I'm hungry. This was the reality of his situation. The great Plum Blossom Sword Saint, reborn in the body of a starving beggar. It would have been hilarious if it wasn't so tragic. And I need food. His body might have changed, but one thing had remained constant: his determination. He wouldn't let something like starvation get in the way of his goal. No, he would claw his way back to the top, even if it meant starting from the bottom, yet again. Mount Hua Sect, he muttered under his breath, eyes blazing with resolve. Wait for me. I'm coming back. Thus began the journey of Chung Myung, once a sword saint, now a hungry child beggar, on his mission to restore the fallen glory of the Mount Hua Sect. Episode 2. What the hell is this situation? 2. All right, buckle up, folks, because Cho Sam... Wait, let's call him Chung Myung, because apparently he's had a serious identity crisis. Just woke up from the mother of all naps. I mean, if you ever thought you slept too long, try waking up after 100 years, only to find out you've been reincarnated as a beggar. Talk about going from top-tier warrior to bottom-tier dumpster diver. Chung Myung's looking around, all disoriented, like a dude who just realized his hangover didn't land him in bed, but in some sketchy alley. And then there's Gu Chil, who's standing there like, did this guy seriously just ask if he's a beggar? Yeah, man, those rags you're wearing? They're not some ironic fashion statement. Our boy Cho Sam, sorry, Young, is spiraling into some deep existential dread. Like, is this really my life now? I went from being a legendary martial artist to collecting leftovers like a raccoon? Gu Chil's just trying to explain, in the kind of tone you use with toddlers, that yeah, dude, you're definitely a beggar. But then Chung Myung pulls out the big guns. Tell me, Gu Chil, what year is it? Gu Chil's like, bro, we're beggars. We don't have calendars. We can't even keep track of a meal, let alone the date. Then Chung Myung drops another bomb. What about the heavenly demon? At this point, Gu Chil's about done with this Q&A session, but he humors him. He tells him, yeah, the heavenly demon was defeated like 100 years ago. Are you okay, man? And Cho Sam, loses it, grabs Gu Chil by the collar like some dramatic soap opera scene, screaming, 100 years? As if that's the craziest part of his day. Dude, you're reincarnated as a beggar. Priorities. Now, here's where things really get juicy. Chung Myung starts getting all dramatic about Mount Hua Sect, which, if you haven't caught on, was his old squad. But Gu Chil's like, Mount Hua? Yeah, never heard of her. It's like asking someone if they've heard of a famous band, and they're like, who? The Beatles? Nah, I'm more of a Nickelback guy. Turns out, the Mount Hua Sect fell off the map hard, like blockbuster movie that bombed hard. To add insult to injury, the Beggars Union, of all people, made it to the top 10 martial arts sects. Beggars. And you know Chung Myung's ego is just shattered. It's like finding out your favorite rock band broke up and then got replaced by a cover band that can't even play in tune. Chung Myung's brain is in overdrive. He's going through all the stages of grief: denial, Anger, bargaining. Well, mostly denial and anger. At this point, he's shaking Gu Chil, trying to get some sense out of him, like a guy trying to get a refund at a store with no receipts. Then, finally, the real punch in the gut. The Mount Hua Sect didn't just fall off, it collapsed. Gone. Kaput. And no one even remembers it existed. Talk about legacy shattering. It's like waking up to find out that everyone's forgotten what Wi-Fi is. Ridiculous, right? But our boy doesn't give up. Nope. He's a man on a mission now, eyes blazing with the kind of passion you only see in a guy who's ready to reclaim his throne, or at least his place in history. He stands up, declares with all the drama of a soap opera hero, "I'm going to Mount Hua." Because who needs reality when you've got burning revenge and a crumbling sect to rebuild, right? Let's just hope he doesn't get killed by dinner time. Wang Cho, the local bully, might have something to say about that. And so begins the saga of Cho Sam, or Chung Myung, or the madman who's about to shake up the world, beggar style. Here's where things start to snowball, just like how your night out for one drink spirals into tequila shots at 3 a.m. So, Chung Myung, now on his high horse, or at least as high as a beggar can get, decides he's got to see what's up with Mount Hua. He's still fuming about how no one knows his old crew. Imagine if you asked people about Batman and they responded with, "Is that some new TikTok trend?" Infuriating, right? That's basically where our guy is at. He's shaking everyone down for info about the Mount Hua sect, but the reactions are all the same. Blank stares or threats to cut his arms off if he keeps touching people's clothes. Which, I mean, fair. Nobody likes their outfit getting pawed by a random beggar, especially one yelling about some ancient martial arts sect. They're probably wondering if he's on something stronger than rice wine. But then, finally, a glimmer of hope. One dude sort of remembers Mount Hua. He's like, "Yeah, wasn't that some big shot sect back in the day? But didn't they collapse after the whole heavenly demon showdown?" Chung Myung's brain short circuits again. Collapsed? His Mount Hua? The prestigious sect he bled and fought for collapsed? It's like finding out your childhood hero went bankrupt and now sells bootleg DVDs on the street corner. Not the reunion he was hoping for. Naturally, he's in full denial mode. He's like, "No way, not my Mount Hua." He even accuses the guy of feeding him lies. Like, this is too ridiculous to be true, right? Unfortunately, the truth can hit harder than Wang Cho's fists. Chung Myung just can't believe that a sect as legendary as Mount Hua could vanish into obscurity like a one-hit wonder band. And let's be real, if anyone had told you that your former self, the badass martial artist who literally slayed the biggest villain of the era, was now just a forgotten name, you'd be screaming to the heavens too. But Chung Myung doesn't take this lying down. No, our boy is fired up. He's ready to march straight to Mount Hua, see the damage for himself, and who knows, maybe rebuild it from the ashes. With his luck, it's going to be a fixer-upper at best. Before he goes, though, Gu Chil tries to reel him back in with the age-old wisdom of, "Don't get yourself killed, okay?" But Chung Myung? Nah, he's too busy screaming about destiny, honor, and restoring Mount Hua to its former glory. His final battle cry before storming off? "I'm going to Mount Hua!" As if that's the cure for all his problems. Honestly, let's hope he's right, because this man is running on nothing but delusion and sheer determination. And just like that, the butterfly's wings have flapped and the storm is about to begin. Who knows what kind of mess this madman is going to create? But one thing's for sure, whatever happens next, it's gonna be one hell of a ride. Episode 3. What the hell is this situation? 3. Gu Chil was having a day. Not just any day, but the kind of day that made you question if reality was even worth living in anymore. First, Chung Myung storms out of the tent like someone just told him his favorite ramen shop closed. And now? He comes back looking as if he just saw the face of God, or at least that's what it seemed like, because the first thing out of his mouth was, "I'm going to Mount Hua." Oh, sure, buddy, Gu Chil thought. "And I'm going to the moon with Elon Musk." The man just stared at Chung Myung, waiting for more nonsense. And Chung Myung? Well, he never disappoints. This may sound absurd, but hear me out. Oh, here we go, Gu Chil braced himself. What came next from this guy's mouth was like listening to a bad soap opera where the plot twists were just thrown at you for fun. "I could have left without a word," Chung Myung said, probably trying to sound all noble and gallant, "but I came back to inform you. Because you know, I owe you one." Guchil blinked. This was getting more and more ridiculous. If life had an eject button, now would have been the time to slam it. But before he could say anything, Chung Myung added, I will repay kindness twofold and resentment tenfold. Remember this name, Chung Myung of the Mount Hua Sect. Yeah, sure, Guchil thought. I'll also remember not to drink whatever this guy had. To be honest, Chung Myung's words sounded cool, like something you'd drop in an action movie trailer. The problem? He looked less like a badass and more like he just lost a fistfight with a blender. Bruised, battered, and dressed like a beggar? He looked more likely to pass out than carry out this grand plan of vengeance. Crazy talk, Guchil muttered, his tone flat as a pancake. Chung Myung, bless his heart, looked hurt. I know it sounds strange, but one day my words will change your destiny. Guchil wanted to reply with, yeah, probably by driving me to an early grave. You're dead if Wang Cho catches you, he said instead. Chung Myung and Guchil locked eyes, and for a moment, Guchil swore they had some sort of telepathic connection. Like, are we really doing this right now? Really? Chung Myung's face lit up like a kid hearing the ice cream truck coming around the corner. The two of them just sat there for a beat before Guchil broke the silence. You better run fast, or he'll beat you into next week. I'm going, Chung Myung chirped, his spirits oddly high for someone about to be murdered. But remember my name, Chung Myung of Mount Hua. He waltzed out of the tent like some sort of half-baked hero. And Guchil, well, he just shook his head, already regretting his life choices. What am I supposed to tell Wang Cho when he comes back? He wondered. Before he could even process that, Chung Myung barged back into the tent. Again? Yeah, he shouted. Huh? Guchil deadpanned. What was that bastard's name? The one who hit me? Wang Cho. His real name's Zhang Pal. Zhang Pal? Sounds like a beggar's name. Chung Myung snorted, probably forgetting he himself looked like a walking, talking garbage fire. Tell him next time. I won't let him go. Guchil raised an eyebrow. Oh, buddy, you're the one who should be worrying about getting let go. With that, Chung Myung exited again, whistling like he didn't just get beaten to a pulp. But of course, in classic style, he popped back in for yet another round. What now? Guchil groaned. Which way to Mount Hua? Guchil's mind went blank. This man had officially crossed the line from eccentric to full-blown lunatic. Chung Myung eventually left for real, running like he was in the goddamn Olympics. Unfortunately, his legs didn't seem to agree with his aspirations. After just a few minutes, he collapsed like a wet noodle, gasping for air like an out-of-shape dad running a 5K. Hack! Hack! Oh God! I'm going to die! He croaked. Well, at least he's self-aware. Guchil would have thought, if he were watching. Chung Myung stared at his own body in disbelief, legs trembling like jello. How did I go from steel to sticks? He lamented. His heart pounded so hard he swore it was trying to escape his chest. Ah! What kind of body is this? He wailed, sounding like a dude who just realized he'd spent all weekend binge-eating pizza and now had to climb Mount Everest. This body? It was less warrior and more starved intern on the third day of ramen-only survival mode. But he had to make it to Mount Hua, right? Right? If I keep this up, I'll be the first Plum Blossom Sword Saint to die of exhaustion. Fantastic. Sitting down in utter defeat, Chung Myung burst into laughter. Why? Because what else could you do in a situation like this? His new life was starting to feel like a cruel cosmic joke. Well, there's only one way out of this mess, he grumbled. I need to get stronger again. And for that, martial arts. He was ready for a fresh start. If only he hadn't been too busy in his past life chasing short-term success instead of building a proper foundation. Hell, if he could go back in time, he'd tell his younger self to focus less on swordsmanship and more on not getting caught stealing booze. Forget the alcohol. He shook off the memory. Now, though? Oh, this time, he'd do it right. His future tower of skill wouldn't just stand tall. It would be an unshakable fortress. After reminiscing about his past and the shortcomings of power-hungry masters, Chung Myung decided the only way forward was through a solid foundation. And to do that, he needed to start from scratch. All right then, he declared with newfound determination. He found a quiet spot outside the town, ready to begin training his dantian, the core of martial artists' chi power. As he sat cross-legged under a shady tree, he whispered, "Equilibrium of 6." And for the first time, his voice was clear and confident. Episode 4. What the hell is the situation? Welcome to the chaotic universe of Chung Myung, where ancient martial arts and existential crises collide. Today's lesson is brought to you by the mystical, yet utterly perplexing equilibrium of six. Sounds like a cosmic symphony, doesn't it? But in reality, it's more like a budget martial arts technique that even your grandma could master with a little yoga practice. So what's the deal with this so-called equilibrium of six? Well, imagine you're at a garage sale for martial arts techniques. Hey, we've got the equilibrium of six here, only slightly used, perfect for that I'm too poor to afford the good stuff look. It's like the martial arts equivalent of buying the off-brand cereal because the name brand was too pricey. Back in Chung Myung's heyday, everyone was all about the equilibrium of six. It was like the starter pack for martial arts. And sure, it might not give you the explosive power of some high-end techniques, but it was the equivalent of putting your body through a spa treatment. Cleanse those impurities. Detox your dantian. Forget about inner chi. Let's get you a six-pack of purification. But here's the kicker. Despite its reputation as a cheap trick, Chung Myung knew its value. It was the backbone of the Mount Hua Sect's training, like the intro to martial arts class that everyone loves to complain about but secretly needs. It might not make you a god of war, but it ensures your insides don't look like a dumpster fire. Chung Myung, in his infinite wisdom, decided to give this technique another shot. Hey, I might be a legendary swordsman, but let's see if I can't purify myself into a godlike figure, one thread at a time. And so, he got to work, treating his chi like a delicate wine. No impurities allowed. After what felt like a marathon of soul-searching and meticulous purification, Chung Myung found himself with a dantian so tiny it could be mistaken for a cosmic joke. Seriously, this thing was so small it made a pea look like a watermelon. But Chung Myung wasn't one to be easily discouraged. Hey, it's all part of the process, he muttered, sweat pouring down his face. Rome wasn't built in a day, and neither was this tiny yet perfect dantian. However, reality quickly set in. Not only was his dantian the martial arts equivalent of a starter pack, but his physical state was that of a fainting goat. Legs? Useless. Arms shivering like they'd seen a ghost. And the worst part, he was starving. Imagine being the pinnacle of martial arts, only to find yourself on the brink of collapse because your stomach was giving you a rebellion. I thought I was supposed to be above such petty concerns, he lamented, clutching his belly. He trudged out of the forest, barely able to move, only to face the ultimate irony. He was dying of hunger. That's right. One of the greatest swordsmen of his generation, reduced to a hungry mess, crawling through town like a lost puppy. Is this how it ends? Chung Myung moaned. Starvation after a life of legendary battles? Talk about a plot twist. So there he was, desperate for food, contemplating how to get money to buy it. Work? In this condition? Ha! Even the thought of it made him want to curl up and cry. And then, just as despair was about to take over, a rustling sound reached his ears. Was it salvation? Or just another complication in his increasingly bizarre life? The rustling sound grew louder, and Chung Myung's keen senses picked up something that was less than reassuring. He craned his neck, straining to catch a glimpse of whatever was making that noise. Was it a band of thieves, eager to relieve him of his non-existent possessions? Or maybe it was a creature of the forest, ready to add some dramatic irony to his already grim situation? No, it was far worse than that. Out of the bushes stumbled a scrawny man with a crooked hat and a weather-beaten face. He looked like he'd been living off the scraps of civilization for too long. Chung Myung's eyes widened. This was a scavenger, someone who knew the ins and outs of surviving on the fringes of society. If anyone knew where to get food, it would be him. The scavenger's eyes widened too, though not in awe of Chung Myung's legendary status. Instead, it was more like he'd just stumbled upon a pathetic mess of a man. You look like you've seen better days, he said, his voice tinged with both curiosity and mockery. Chung Myung managed a weak, forced smile. You don't say. I'm in a bit of a predicament. The scavenger squinted at him, then chuckled. Well, looks like the great Chung Myung has fallen from grace. What's a hero like you doing in this state? Did you run out of epic battles and decide to starve instead? I'm not here for jokes, Chung Myung grumbled. I need food. I've got nothing, and I've got nowhere to go. The scavenger scratched his head, as if trying to remember the last time he'd seen someone in such a state. Food, huh? I might have something for you, but it'll cost you. Cost me? Chung Myung echoed. He wasn't sure he had the energy to argue, but he knew he had to ask. What do you want in exchange? The scavenger's eyes gleamed with mischief. Well, I could use some help with a little task. It's not glamorous, but it's honest work. Help me out, and I'll get you fed. Chung Myung sighed, too weak to argue. Fine. What's the task? Excellent, the scavenger said, clapping his hands together. I need you to help me gather herbs from the forest. It's nothing dangerous, just tedious. Do that, and you'll have a meal fit for someone who's not about to keel over. Chung Myung managed a nod, feeling both relieved and resigned. He followed the scavenger into the forest, his legs trembling with each step. It wasn't the grandiose way he'd imagined his return to glory, but it was something. Besides, as the scavenger had pointed out, sometimes even the greatest heroes need to take a step back and do some dirty work. As they walked, Chung Myung's mind buzzed with thoughts of his dantian and the path he had yet to tread. He might have started with a tiny, unimpressive dantian, but he knew the journey was far from over. If he had to start from the bottom and work his way up, he would. One way or another, he was determined to get back to the top, even if it meant gathering herbs with a scavenger. Just another obstacle, he told himself. Another challenge to overcome. The scavenger led him deeper into the forest, and Chung Myung set his sights on the task ahead. As long as he kept his eyes on the prize, he knew he could face whatever came next. After all, what was a hero's journey without a few detours and unexpected turns? With a new sense of purpose, Chung Myung readied himself for the task at hand. His legendary status might have been momentarily on hold, but his determination was stronger than ever. The road to recovery and greatness had just begun, and he was ready to take it, one step at a time. Episode 5. What the hell is this situation? 5. What is that? Chung Myung shook his head to clear his mind, only to find something shiny in front of him. Huh? At the same time, the sound of metal clicking could be heard. Tsk, tsk, tsk. He's still so young. How did he end up as a beggar? Clink, clink. Coins started flying towards Chung Myung. It looks like he's been beaten pretty badly. Looks like he'll die soon. Such a terrible world. What a pitiful kid. What? What was happening? Ah. That's right. I'm a beggar, aren't I? I forgot for a second. To everyone else, Chung Myung looked like a beggar. No, he was a beggar in his own eyes, too. He was a young child who hadn't reached adulthood yet. He was so severely beaten that his eyes were puffy and blue while blood clotted his open wounds. And such a beggar was lying flat on the street. Ugh, he can't survive without our help. I can't just watch a child suffer like that without help. What sort of person would do such a thing? A raggedy young beggar with underdeveloped limbs and covered in dust seemed to be dying. No, it didn't merely look like he was dying. Chung Myung was really dying. How else could such a perfect beggar scene be witnessed from him? Coins kept flying into view, one after another. Tsk, tsk. No matter how I look at him, he's just a beggar. How did he get here? It seemed like the world still had kindness in it. People were clicking their tongues as they passed by Chung Myung before tossing a few coins in his direction. Looking at the coins that came pouring in, Chung Myung couldn't restrain the tears in his eyes. Oh my, he's crying. Poor thing, it sure is pitiful. Go and buy yourself some noodles with that money. The warmth was too much. However, the reason why Chung Myung was shedding tears wasn't due to the kindness he received. A disciple of the great Mount Hua Sect has been reduced to begging. How did he fall so low? Until just a few days ago, he was the greatest swordsman in the world. He risked his life and went to battle Chunma, who was about to usher in a new era of chaos. Before that, he was the most elegant swordsman that roamed the world. But now, he was here begging. The world was finding new ways to wound him. I have some pride too. If he accepted the money, then he would truly turn into a beggar. What a beggar he would be. A noble swordsman of the great Mount Hua, who earned his living clutching the ankles of others, as if he would actually pick up the money. It was a truly impossible task for Chung Myung. Chung Myung had a warrior's pride. He would never give up. Even when there was a blade about to slit his throat, he refused to bend or break. Chung Myung raised his head while clenching his teeth and shouted, "Thank you so much. You will be blessed, sir." His pride was long dead. He had to live? Kya! Chung Myung patted his bulging belly. He looked peculiar, like a tadpole with a slim body that held no charm and a convex belly. Self-esteem went to drain with the food. Better to live as a beggar than die. Due to his small stature, he couldn't eat much. Just 3 dumplings were enough to make his stomach bulge out. He still had 3 coins left up his sleeve. Coins that he would have never picked up in his past life, looked like treasures in this new life. I never would have thought that money was so important. Chung Myung remembered the words of his Sayung, who would always hold his head in agony on the last day of each month. Warriors need to be obsessed with wealth. If possible, Chung Myung wanted to go back to those days and ease his Sayung's suffering. My stomach is actually full. A young beggar was mouthing his complaints off to a ghost. Chung Myung had to keep himself from crying when he thought of his hard-working, money-obsessed Sayung's final moments in the battle with... Anyway. First, I need to live. Chung Myung scratched his head. He left without a plan, and he had no idea how to get to Shanxi. I underestimated how far away 2,000 miles is. Chung Myung began to reflect on his actions. All of his plans revolved around the abilities of his previous body. Even though he knew that his body and the circumstances had changed, it wasn't an easy task to adapt to his new body overnight. In the past, he would have reached Shanxi in half a day. He would have even stopped for a cold drink at an inn beneath Mount Hua. But now, heading to Mount Hua with his deprived body was a risky venture. Even if Chung Myung could defeat any mountain bandits or beasts, there was no way he could overcome hunger. His mind felt burdened as he realized that the journey he expected to be easy turned into an epic journey that could cost him the life he had just regained. But I can't just beg my way to Shanxi. Chung Myung scratched his head, feeling lost. I need to find a way, but I need to understand what I need to find a way. He wasn't aware of it when he first awoke, but 100 years had passed since his era. It was no exaggeration to say that Chung Myung had no idea how the current world worked. But how should he go about finding out? Hey! An average person would take more than 2 months to get to Shanxi. It wouldn't be too strange to believe that, with Chung Myung's frail body, it could take up to half a year to reach Mount Hua. Hey! It was horrifying and frustrating for Chung Myung, who desperately wanted to see Mount Hua's condition with his own eyes. He had to find a way, but right now, not a single thing came to his mind. Hey, you there? Are you deaf or something? Huh? Chung Myung turned his head. What now? He heard everything clearly, but he didn't think that someone would be calling for him. There was no reason why anyone would talk to a beggar. 3 beggars were glaring down at him with unfriendly expressions. They looked like beggars. His current life seemed to be intertwined with beggars in many ways. Me? You? Who else could I be calling? What the hell is wrong with you? The beggar standing in front of Chung Myung spat on the ground. I don't know what hole you crawled out from, but who gave you permission to beg here? Was permission needed to beg? You're still a child, so I'll spare your life. Take out everything you have, including the money you have hidden in your sleeve, and leave this place. The remainder of Chung Myung's limited funds were stashed in his sleeves and in his hands. Chung Myung looked down at his hand. They were the leftovers, the cold dumplings. You people have no conscience. You're really something. Take this away? This little bit of food too? What was he supposed to eat? You beggar. It was odd. One beggar was demanding from another beggar. It felt like he was spitting on his own face. Wait a minute. Chung Myung carefully placed the dumplings to the side. He then stood up, stretched his hand forward a couple of times, took a step ahead, then 1 step behind, and repeated that several times. The beggars, who were watching the strange scene, rolled their eyes. What are you doing now? Wait just a moment. I'll be done soon. After stretching his arms and legs a couple more times, Chung Myung got up. It's not entirely perfect, but this should be enough. After his odd routine, Chung Myung had managed to get a sense of distance and understand the length of his reach. Even with his short limbs, he managed to adapt. So, you guys are about to be very upset. I have a grudge against beggars. What? Don't you understand what I'm saying? Well, that's just how the world is. It's messed up. Don't be too upset. Just accept it and move on. What is this guy talking about? Chung Myung cracked his neck. By the way, I can't hit very hard because my body is weak, so you're going to get hit a whole lot to make up for it. This crazy. At that moment, Chung Myung lunged ahead and threw a punch at the beggar standing at the front. Ack, a proper step. A fully extended fist that gathered strength through the gentle rotation of the waist, utilizing strongly grounded legs. Chung Myung's punch landed solidly, and the impact was like striking a wall. Thud! The beggar who got hit with the unexpected blow silently collapsed on the spot. Seeing that, Chung Myung smiled. You, Puck, he kicked another beggar. I am Plum Blossom Sword Saint of the great Mount Hua. You people. At that moment, all his accumulated frustration from reincarnation exploded. Esteemed sir. Does a beggar look like an esteemed sir? Great beggar? Should I hit you again? The beggars, who had their pride wounded and bodies beaten, winced. Where did this formidable person come from? It hurts so much that I could die. It didn't take much to subdue them. It was astonishing that a child managed to knock out 3 grown adults, showing the contrast between their appearances and abilities. It's going to take some time to get used to this body. It wasn't easy. If he had been in his previous body, he would have handled them more efficiently. But now he'd use every bit of his strength and agility. One of them kept getting up after every hit, so Chung Myung had to keep his efforts consistent. That Jal? Chopal? Whatever his name was, he should also be taught a lesson like this. Just thinking about him made Chung Myung grumble with frustration. If only he had known how different his new body was in advance. If only he had the stamina he used to have, he could have dealt with Chopal more effectively. He was eager to get back to Mount Hua, so he couldn't take revenge right now. However, he was determined to settle scores eventually. Men. Yes. The 3 beggars, still recovering from their defeat, looked at Chung Myung. No matter how I see it, he looks like a beggar who couldn't even lift a bag of rice. This doesn't make sense. Small, weak, and thin. On the surface, he looked frail. No one expected him to be so strong. They had underestimated him, leading to their defeat. Chung Myung wasn't very fast or strong by his old standards, but he was still a force to be reckoned with. Hey, yes. Please follow my instructions. Esteemed sir. What's the point of understanding now? It's faster to show them than to convince them. The main thing is that they know they've been bested. Chung Myung glanced at the beggars and spoke. I'm asking, do you know the quickest way to Shanxi? The beggars looked at each other, seemingly amused. Ha ha ha, you're asking something obvious. Oh, really? If we knew the answer, we wouldn't be in this situation. Ask someone else. Chung Myung sighed. It was a mistake to seek advice from beggars. Enough. Leave. Thank you. Be well. The beggars bowed and started to leave quickly. Hold on. The beggars stopped in their tracks. Yes? It's fine to leave, but leave everything you have behind. You approached me while I was eating, so I'll need a bit more than just your company. Realizing the seriousness in his tone, the beggars handed over the coins they had and quickly left. Ugh, you. Yes? Make sure to take only what you need and leave the rest. Otherwise, you might find yourself in trouble. It was a unique situation where a beggar was setting terms with others in broad daylight. Episode 6. Oh my, Mount Hua is in ruins. Finally, Chung Myung leaned against his trusty stick, which he was using as a cane. He finally beheld the majestic Mount Hua. Finally! Tears streamed down his face. How tough had it been to get here? He'd nearly tangoed with death so many times, and he'd done it in a child's body. Less of a superhero, more of a glorified paperweight. Of course, the usual travel troubles, starvation, exhaustion, had tried to kill him too. But hey, those are basically the spice of life, right? After all his dreadful ordeals, Chung Myung had finally made it to Mount Hua. Finally. If he penned his trials, it could either be a hero's epic or a beggar's memoir. Chung Myung couldn't ignore the toll on his body. Even though he'd gathered enough chi to fuel a small army, most of it went into mere survival. His body had remained as sturdy as wet cardboard. Every step felt like his bones were having a raucous party without him. His already tattered clothes had become a fashion disaster. Dust clung to them like an unwelcome ex. But that wasn't the point. Chung Myung had arrived at Mount Hua. He thought, screw the whole reincarnation fantasy. If this is what rebirth looks like, I'd rather stay dead. But the suffering ends here. He'd made it to Mount Hua. Now, he'd see with his own eyes. What in the world happened to Mount Hua? Let's go! Chung Myung, using his stick as a prop, started his ascent up the mountain. After a while, whack! Whack! Chung Myung clung to the cliff like a desperate cat hanging from a curtain. What kind of sick joke is this? On this mountain? On this venerable mountain? Did it make sense for the path to resemble a medieval torture device? He remembered the Shaolin and Wudang paths lined with incense and comfort. Here? Nada. Chung Myung gazed mournfully down. Endless cliffs. Okay, maybe not endless, more like really, really tall. So tall he was above the clouds, and still trudging along. This wasn't a path. This was a cruel prank. If this was a road, then a chicken was a dragon. Seriously, can you call it a road if you're crawling like a worm and wishing for gravity to be kinder? Damn it! Who thought it was a good idea to put a sect on top of this mountain? Chung Myung was itching to run up and investigate the sect's condition, but it seemed like his legs had other plans. Sahyung, isn't Mount Hua supposed to be auspicious? Look at that peak, it's sword-shaped. Seems like a prime spot for a sect. Shit, damn it, sword-shaped peaks? Sword-like, indeed. The path to the sect was like walking on a bed of nails. It was said Mount Hua was the steepest of the 5 great mountains. Only when he couldn't use martial arts did Chung Myung realize what that truly meant. I'm really going to die. This was no joke. He was utterly convinced that his life was hanging by a thread. His limbs shook, and the path stretched on. Seeing how deserted the place was, he understood how badly Mount Hua had been hit. Ack! Chung Myung groaned and propped himself against the wall. But quitting wasn't an option. After all this, what was the point in giving up now? If there's a mountain, you climb it. Climb it and rise again with grit and guts. The truth was, going down was a bigger gamble. Seriously. A hand clawed at the cliff's edge. The dusty, white fingertips looked like they'd seen better days, but they managed to hoist the rest of his body up. I'm gonna die! Chung Myung flopped onto his back, barely managing to haul himself up. Ha ha! Almost took a dive. He could see the clouds below, far beneath him. Reaching this point as a child was deserving of a personal high five. It wasn't easy. It was never easy. The good news? He didn't have to descend. Only finding the sect remained. Let's see. Chung Myung struggled to his feet and surveyed the area. That way, right ahead was a road leading towards the summit. From a little way along the road, he could see Mount Hua. His tiny legs got a second wind. His heart pounded. After 100 years, he was back at Mount Hua. Of course, it's only been a month since I got here. But using a century sounds way more epic. Climbing the hill was a breeze compared to the earlier struggle. His body was worn out, but the thought of reaching Mount Hua was like a shot of adrenaline. Ah! The sight of the roof tiles of the main gate brought a lump to his throat. The rivers and mountains had changed, but these tiles, oh, the nostalgia. Right? Those old tiles. Huh? Old? A tile was missing? Chung Myung rubbed his eyes. Was he hallucinating? No matter how much he rubbed, the scenery stayed the same. With each step closer, the half-destroyed gate became more and more evident. Chung Myung stopped dead in his tracks. The main gate was the first thing visitors saw. Even if the interior was a wreck, the front gate was always pristine. But this was Mount Hua's gate. Its frugal, practical design screamed Mount Hua. It should at least be kept tidy. But what in the world was he looking at? Tiles scattered, graffiti everywhere. It was like a teenager's bedroom, but way more neglected. The cracked, blackened, unpainted pillars were downright horrifying. Spiderwebs, fine, those could be expected. But the place looked like it had been abandoned for ages. And the fire dragon point. Where's the sign? The signboard, where did it go? Wasn't the signboard supposed to be Mount Hua's pride? Where in the 7 hells had it gone? This gate did not say Great Mount Hua Sect. That was the signboard Sahyung cleaned every morning. Where did it vanish to? Chung Myung's legs gave out. He staggered to the main gate, speechless. From what I heard, it's ruined? Mount Hua Sect? Oh, I think I've heard of them. They used to be famous, right? Didn't they slay the heavenly demon or something? What happened to them? Ruined? Mount Hua? Chung Myung's eyes twitched. No, what kind of crap is this? Others might despair, but Chung Myung was on the verge of a full-on meltdown. Mount Hua destroyed. Not just anything, but Mount Hua. Mount Hua. Oh my, Mount Hua is ruined. Mount Hua. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't deny it. Chung Myung, battered and shaken, had to face the truth. Sahyung Jang Moon, why did this happen? Why did this happen? Ah, this suffocating silence. Ugh! Mount Hua could actually be reduced to ruins. No matter what he'd heard on the way, there hadn't been a single word about Mount Hua. This is why I told you to act in moderation, Sahyung. Yeah, you idiot. Mount Hua is a sect. What's the point of warriors stuck in the mountains, prettying themselves up and acting all high and mighty? Those who ignore others' struggles have no right to complain. Even then, you should have held back. The elders, disciples, and even the great disciples were all killed in that battle. Other sects had sent their best, but no one had invested like Mount Hua. The elders who should have led the sect were gone, and the disciples who should have succeeded them, dead. All that remained were the youngest disciples, still wet behind the ears. Who was left to carry on the legacy of great Mount Hua? Right. His hope felt like it was crumbling, much like the front gate. Mount Hua was indeed destroyed. Sahyung, this is why I said so. Didn't I warn you? If we blindly followed sect rules, nothing would be left. Look what happened. How can you face the rest of the sect in the underworld? Ah, you frustrating man. Chung Myung's anger echoed through the empty mountain. This is insane, really. He returned to life after a century, only to find Mount Hua in shambles. He fought to protect this, but if this was the result, what was the point? Despair began to seep in. And then, who's there? A voice reached his ears. Who's there? Chung Myung's head snapped towards the voice. He peered into the shadows, trying to make out the source. A figure emerged from behind a pile of rubble. It was an old man, hunched over and clad in tattered robes that looked like they hadn't seen a wash in decades. Who are you? The old man croaked. What are you doing here? Chung Myung gaped. I'm Chung Myung. I came to see Mount Hua. What's left of it, anyway? The old man squinted at him. Chung Myung? The Chung Myung from 100 years ago? Yes, that's me! Chung Myung replied, his voice tinged with a mix of relief and frustration. I've come back, and I find Mount Hua in ruins. What happened? The old man sighed deeply, the sound like the groaning of old floorboards. You really don't know? Chung Myung's heart sank. No, I heard nothing about this on my way here. The stories all ignored Mount Hua. The old man's eyes grew heavy with sadness. Mount Hua fell into despair after you disappeared. The sect was betrayed, its members slaughtered, and the once glorious mountain was left to rot. What you see now is the result of decades of neglect and sorrow. Chung Myung clenched his fists, his frustration boiling over. Who could have done this? How could they? The old man shook his head. It's not just one person. It was a combination of misfortune, betrayal, and neglect. The sect's enemies took advantage of the chaos, and those who were left could do nothing to stop it. Chung Myung's eyes blazed with determination. This can't be the end. Mount Hua deserves better. I won't stand by and watch it fall further into ruin. The old man's gaze softened. You're not the same boy who left. You've grown stronger. Perhaps you can revive Mount Hua, but it won't be easy. There are remnants of the sect still scattered across the land. They need to be united, and you'll need to rebuild what's been lost. Chung Myung took a deep breath, his resolve hardening. I will do it. Mount Hua will rise again. I will gather the survivors, restore the glory, and make sure that this great mountain is never forgotten. The old man nodded approvingly. Then you have your task ahead of you. But remember, it will be a long and arduous journey. You will need all your strength, wisdom, and courage. Chung Myung squared his shoulders, a fire in his eyes. I'm ready. I've come this far, and I won't stop now. With that, Chung Myung turned towards the shattered remnants of Mount Hua, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The road to restoration would be fraught with obstacles, but he was determined to see Mount Hua restored to its former glory. As he walked towards the heart of the ruined sect, a new chapter began for Mount Hua and for Chung Myung. One filled with hope, struggle, and the promise of a brighter future. Episode 7. Oh my, Mount Hua is in ruins. 2. Well, look who's here. After a month of trudging through the wilderness, Chung Myung's eyes finally land on some living, breathing people. And look at that, the legendary Mount Hua isn't entirely a ghost town yet. The door, clearly having seen better days, creaked open. Out popped a guy in black who, let's be honest, looked like he'd seen one too many horror movies. What's this? A child? Chung Myung felt a pang of annoyance. A month on the road, and the first thing he gets is the "you must be a kid" treatment. Classic. And look at that, a beggar? Wait, you're calling this a beggar? The guy's eyes didn't even flinch. To him, Chung Myung was just another raggedy kid lost in the big bad world. You came here alone? The middle-aged guy asked, scratching his head like he'd just encountered a UFO. Yeah, that's right, Chung Myung mumbled, feeling awkward. The truth was, he'd just walked up. Persistence and stubbornness were his top skills. But in the current scenario, it felt like boasting. Well, more importantly, I've got questions, Chung Myung said, trying to steer the conversation away from his beggar status. Oh, really? The man raised an eyebrow as if a kid asking questions was a cosmic joke. Are you a martial artist from Mount Hua? Mount Hua, you say? Yeah. Am I right? I suppose for now. Relief washed over Chung Myung like a cool breeze. Mount Hua might not be completely in the crapper yet. It was still alive in some form. Perfect. I'll stay the night then, he decided. The man, let's call him Mr. Nice Guy, welcomed him with open arms. It's getting dark, and Mount Hua isn't exactly a Hilton. You might freeze your butt off out there. Chung Myung's internal alarm bells started ringing. Was this guy for real, or was he a con artist in disguise? If you're alone and have nowhere else to go, come on in. We'll chat more later, said Mr. Nice Guy with a grin. Chung Myung couldn't help but be a bit suspicious. But hey, if he was a frail beggar, what could he do? He stepped inside, and nostalgia hit him like a ton of bricks. Memories of training, the cracked floor, and the bluish-white stone flashed before him. But wait, what was this? Mud? Where did the fancy blue stones go? Chung Myung rubbed his eyes, hoping they'd clear up the situation. Nope, the ground was still muddy. Ugh, he groaned. Was it a case of the new guy being less of a perfectionist, or did they just sell the stones off for quick cash? Just calm down, he told himself. Stones or no stones, Mount Hua's survival mattered more. But then he spotted something truly horrifying. Or rather, not spotted. The heavenly golden palace was gone. Just barren ground. This was no longer Mount Hua. It was Mount What the Heck Happened. Chung Myung's mind raced as he faced the mess of his beloved sect. Unam, Mr. Nice Guy, noticed Chung Myung's distress. It's a bit desolate, huh? Yeah, putting it mildly, Chung Myung muttered, struggling to process the wreckage of what was once a grand sect. Unam ushered him to a shrine of sorts, with Chung Myung expecting, well, something grand. But instead, he was met with disappointment. The temple was as frugal as a dollar store. Where's the good stuff? Chung Myung asked, horrified. Where's the golden candlesticks, the fancy scrolls? And then his eyes landed on something that nearly gave him a heart attack. Where's the flower? The flower? Unam asked, baffled. Yes, the plum blossom made of some weird metal. Oh, that. We sold it. Sold it. Unam seemed puzzled. It wasn't exactly a fit for the sect's vibe. A merchant offered a good price, so we sold it. Sold it? Chung Myung's eyes bugged out. That was one of the sacred items. How could you sell it? The realization hit him hard, and Chung Myung crumpled to the floor in a dramatic heap, utterly defeated. Mount Hua was in shambles, not just in disrepair, but completely and utterly wrecked. He could almost see his old friend Sahyung Jangmun's ghost shaking its head in despair. Ruined. Just ruined, Chung Myung groaned as he passed out, overwhelmed by the utter collapse of his once proud sect. As Chung Myung lay there, sprawled out like a starfish, the night settled around Mount Hua. Unam watched him with a mixture of sympathy and confusion. The old sect's disintegration was a painful topic, but seeing Chung Myung's reaction brought it all back to the surface. In the stillness, Unam quietly instructed the others to prepare a place for Chung Myung to rest. Despite the sect's dilapidated state, hospitality was still a principle they clung to. Chung Myung eventually came to, groggy and disoriented. He blinked a few times, trying to remember where he was. The room was modest, though far from luxurious, and the scent of incense lingered in the air. Ah, you're awake. Unam greeted him with a warm, if slightly weary smile. You fainted from the shock. I've had the servants prepare a place for you to sleep. Thank you, Chung Myung mumbled, rubbing his eyes and sitting up. He looked around at the sparse but clean accommodations. Don't worry too much about the state of the sect, Unam said gently. The past is past. What matters is how we rebuild and remember what was lost. Chung Myung nodded, trying to push past his frustration. I'll do whatever I can to help. Mount Hua's legacy isn't just about the stones or the buildings. It's about the spirit. Unam smiled. appreciating the sentiment. That's the spirit. Even if Mount Hua isn't what it once was, there's always room for hope. As Chung Myung lay down to rest, he found it hard to quiet his racing thoughts. The weight of the sect's downfall was heavy, and he couldn't shake the feeling of responsibility. He remembered the vows he made and the dreams he held for Mount Hua. The night wore on, and the once proud halls of Mount Hua fell silent, save for the occasional creak of the old building and the whisper of the wind. Chung Myung drifted into uneasy sleep, his dreams filled with images of the past and visions of what could be. Tomorrow would bring a new day, and with it, new challenges. But Chung Myung knew that, despite the ruin, there was still a spark of hope. And sometimes, that's all you need to start rebuilding from the ground up. Episode 8. Oh my, Mount Hua is in ruins. Elder Hyung of Mount Hua Sect eyed Eunam with a look that could only be described as perplexed professor trying to figure out a very complex math problem. You mean he came up here alone? Yes. And then he fainted inside Okchan Temple? It seems like he couldn't even eat properly, but since he climbed Mount Hua by himself, it's natural for him to be exhausted. Hyunjong chuckled, shaking his head. Well, I suppose that makes sense. Climbing Mount Hua is tough even for an adult. For a kid, it must have felt like running a marathon in quicksand. So, where's the kid now? I moved him to the Plum Blossom Hall. I also called Eun-jin to check on him. He said there was no problem other than fatigue. Good, good. A guest is a guest after all. But climbing Mount Hua alone as a kid? What's his story? Well, after the visit to Okchan, I was going to ask him, but he fainted before I could get a word out. Ah, the plot thickens. Eunam's frown deepened as he mentioned something about selling the plum blossoms. He said, "You sold them." Hyunjong scratched his beard. He fainted after saying that? Intriguing. I wonder if he's related to someone from Mount Hua. Yes, he did ask if I was a martial artist of Mount Hua. That could mean he came here to join us? Hyunjong chuckled. What's so strange about someone knowing Mount Hua? We've left quite a mark on history. It's no wonder people remember us. Right? And who knows, he might be a descendant of one of the old members. Ah, I see. Eunam nodded, his expression thoughtful. If he's worried about theft, what is there left to steal, really? True, true, Hyunjong said with a half smile, shaking his head. We've sold pretty much everything. It's like selling your last slice of pizza and then crying because you're out of pizza. Eunam, trying to ignore the unease in his voice, pondered what the boy had said and decided that it was best to keep some things to himself. He wasn't keen on explaining how the sect had sold off everything valuable, including the history. Bring him to me as soon as he wakes up, Hyunjong said, clearly lost in his own thoughts. Yes, sect leader. As Eunam left, Hyunjong brooded over the state of Mount Hua. Selling it off felt like adding insult to injury. The ancestors were surely rolling in their graves. He sighed. The name of Mount Hua should not end in my time. The once great sect seemed to be a shadow of its former self, and despite his tireless efforts, hope was slipping away. Meanwhile, Chung Myung was cursing up a storm. You damned idiots! You sold it? Really? He was furious, feeling like his ancestors' legacy had been sold off like cheap knockoffs. Even if you were starving, that's not something you sell. He tried to make sense of the mess, noting how the sect had deteriorated into near nothingness. The sect's decline is an understatement. It's practically collapsed. As Chung Myung rolled around in frustration, he couldn't help but think how the martial arts had taken a nosedive. Seriously, the martial arts are a mess! His eyes flicked over the crumbling Mount Hua and its surroundings, a painful reminder of its former glory. If only the Plum Blossom Sword Saint had survived. Still, he knew he had to revive Mount Hua without revealing his true identity. Easier to fight the demonic sect, he muttered, knowing he had to tread carefully. I owe Mount Hua everything, he lamented. Yet, here I am, trying to fix what's left. Determined, he looked up, remembering his Sayung Jang Moon, who had once smiled upon him from the heavens. Damn it, who said anything was impossible? He had defied the odds before, and he would do so again. With newfound resolve, he declared, I will make it the best in Murim. Everyone at Mount Hua shivered, knowing things were about to get very interesting. Chung Myung was feeling like he'd stumbled into a poorly organized flea market. This place is a joke. They've sold everything of value. I bet they even sold the curtains and the kitchen sink. He was fuming over how low the sect had fallen. Even if the place was a mess, some things should have been sacred. Selling off the last of the precious items, it's like selling off your soul for a few coins. Despite his frustration, he had to admit, well, at least I'm not dealing with a third-rate disciple. The old man in wasn't even on my radar back then. Now, though, he's like a bump on a log compared to what I used to be. It wasn't the way Chung Myung wanted to start his grand plan to save the sect, but he was determined. I need to figure out a way to fix this mess without blowing my cover. If I reveal who I am now, they'll either laugh at me or kick me out before I can say, "I told you so." Rolling on the floor, he thought, is this Mount Hua or some twisted version of a broken-down theme park? I'd rather fight 100 demons than face this level of disaster. He wasn't about to let the mess discourage him, though. The world is full of impossible challenges, but who said that's going to stop me? If I could rise from a troublemaker to a legendary swordsman, I can definitely fix this. Determined, Chung Myung's eyes sparkled with renewed vigor. I'm going to turn this place around and make it the top sect in Murim. No one's going to remember this mess if I have anything to say about it. Mount Hua's current state might be a shambles, but Chung Myung was ready to face the challenge head-on, and everyone around had better brace themselves for the revival of the century. Where did you go? I was looking around. Looking around? Unam eyed Chung Myung with suspicion, but Chung Myung just crossed his legs and gazed at the sky as if he didn't have a care in the world. Was this kid always like this? When Unam first met him, he was all politeness and decorum. Now, he was radiating bad vibes like he'd just wandered out of a soap opera villain's lair. Have you eaten? I'm not hungry. Chung Myung's response was as sincere as a poker face at a high-stakes game. The state of Mount Hua had effectively stolen his appetite. Who could keep their appetite with such a dismal view? Then follow me. Huh? The sect leader wants to see you. Ah, yes. Chung Myung nodded, figuring he'd have to face this sooner or later. The door creaked open to reveal an old man sitting serenely. Chung Myung was taken aback. So this is the sect leader everyone's been raving about. The man's aura screamed dedication, like he'd been living and breathing Mount Hua for a century. But he didn't seem to have the courage to speak first. As a sect leader, he had everything, except perhaps a spine. Greetings. Is there anywhere as unhappy as this? Chung Myung sighed internally. After all he'd been through, this sect leader seemed like a toddler compared to the sect leader of his time. Here was the Plum Blossom Sword Saint, bowing to a toddler. Why did I have to be reborn? Should I have just taken a dirt nap and saved myself the trouble? Chung Myung held his thoughts in and bowed politely. I am Chung Myung. I am Hyun Jong. The sect leader managed to smile. A guest has arrived, but we don't have much to offer. I hope you can understand our situation. Ah, yes. Hyun Jong's eyebrows twitched. Normally, one would respond with something like, don't worry, or how could an uninvited guest expect much? But this kid's eyes and gestures suggested he wasn't expecting much to begin with. I heard you said something interesting in Okcheon Temple. Sold it? What are you talking about? Chung Myung tilted his head innocently. Hyun Jong narrowed his eyes, but Chung Myung's bewildered look was as genuine as a $3 bill. He really doesn't know? This kid must be the world's best liar. Even Sahyung couldn't see through his lies or find his hidden booze. Hyun Jong couldn't find any evidence of deceit. Did you not say such words? I don't remember well. The only thing I recall was being so tired I fainted. Fair enough. Climbing Mount Hua would have pushed anyone to their limits. But if you were that tired, why didn't you say anything? It is said that when entering the gate, one must pay tribute to the ancestors. Hyun Jong raised an eyebrow at Unam. You dragged this kid off to make him pray after he climbed up here alone? Seriously? Unam blinked. No. The kid was fine until he entered the gate, and then he passed out from exhaustion? What kind of crazy story is this? Unam shot Chung Myung a look that could have melted iron, but Chung Myung's eyes remained wide and innocent. Hanjong nodded. That sounds reasonable. Apologies for our oversight. It's fine. Right, another question. Yes? Why did you climb all the way up this steep mountain? Don't tell me you did it on a whim. Mount Hua isn't exactly a tourist trap, especially not for a child. A sharp question. but Chung Myung had his answer ready. Sect leader. I'm listening. I want to enter the Mount Hua Sect. You want to enter? Hyunjong's eyes narrowed. Yes. Hyunjong stared at Chung Myung, but the kid's innocent eyes betrayed nothing. Does that mean you climbed up here with a purpose? Yes. Hyunjong nodded. Mount Hua wasn't a place for casual sightseeing. You want to enter Mount Hua. This means you know about Mount Hua? Yes. Enter. Hyunjong's eyes narrowed. Chung Myung licked his lips. It makes sense. Chung Jin was pursued by the demonic sect and disappeared before the final battle. A missing person, not dead. Chung Jin fell off a cliff, was found by a woodcutter who healed him, and as thanks, the woodcutter became his disciple and learned Mount Hua's martial arts. Chung Myung is the descendant of that woodcutter. Perfect. A flawless script. The best part? Chung Myung had control over everything he said. This story was airtight, and he was practically guaranteed acceptance into the sect. Even if I don't get the same fame as before, at least they'll treat me decently. Now, ask me the reason, and I'll unleash my script. This will be a breeze. I accept. Yes, of course, the entry. What? Chung Myung gaped at Hyunjong. Contrary to his expectations, the sect leader just nodded. If you want to join, we should let you. Huh? Wait a minute. Was it really that easy to get into this place? Just like that? Sect leader? Unam was equally shocked. Didn't you say we won't accept new students? Yes, ask him. I changed my mind. Hyunjong grinned. Truth is, we aren't in a position to accept new students, but we can't turn away a child who made it all the way up here knowing about Mount Hua. Ha, but, Unam. Yes, sect leader. Things go round and round. Regardless of how we are now, a child who sought us out deserves a chance. Are we going to kick out those who come to us just because we aren't what we used to be? If anyone else heard this, they might be impressed. But for Chung Myung, who'd meticulously prepared his story, it was more skin-crawling than inspiring. What is this? Aren't they supposed to be suspicious of someone they don't know? How did he even become a sect leader? No, he must have become one because he was like this. Ah, no. Before that, I live. It's fine. Hyunjong shook his head firmly. Whatever your past was, once you climb Mount Hua, your past is wiped clean. Of course it is, but it can't be that simple. And no, I told you it's fine. Man, it's not okay. Listen to me. Unam, sect leader? Give this child a place to stay. Yes. Your name is Chung Myung? Chung Myung nodded. A very nice name. A very good name. Chung Myung of the Chung family. The sect leader chuckled. This must be fate. You don't need to change your name. You might not know, but your name carries weight in Mount Hua. Hyunjong's eyes narrowed. Is anyone worthy enough for that name? Yes, Chung Myung replied. I'll see. Chung Myung stood stiffly as Unam led him away with a sullen expression. This way. As Chung Myung stepped outside, the landscapes of Mount Hua caught his eye. I've made it. Made it. Unam interrupted his thoughts. The introduction ceremony hasn't been held yet, but from now on, you're a disciple of Mount Hua. You'll become a vessel for the martial arts and the youngest disciple of Mount Hua. Youngest? Chung Myung's eyes trembled. Youngest? Him? The plum blossom sword saint, Chung Myung, the youngest? Chung Myung's amusement bubbled over, and Unam couldn't help but smile. You seem happy. Yes, so happy. Ha ha ha! But why were tears falling? Ah, yes! Chung Myung wiped his tears, trying to regain his composure. He wasn't sure if he was laughing or crying anymore. Unam led him through the winding paths of Mount Hua. As they walked, Chung Myung tried to get his bearings and prepare himself for the new chapter of his life. This way, Unam said, guiding him to a modest but welcoming dormitory. Chung Myung took in his surroundings, feeling both awe and disbelief. Mount Hua was a far cry from the grandeur of his past, but it had a charm of its own. Your quarters are here. We'll have a formal introduction ceremony soon, but for now, make yourself comfortable, Unam said. Thank you, Chung Myung replied, trying to hide his excitement. His heart was racing with a mix of anticipation and apprehension. As Unam left, Chung Myung took a deep breath and looked around his new room. It was simple, but to him, it felt like the start of a grand adventure. He chuckled softly to himself, thinking about how different things were from his previous life. He looked out the window, taking in the breathtaking view of Mount Hua. The rugged mountains, the serene atmosphere, it was all so different from what he'd known. This was it. He was now a disciple of Mount Hua, and no matter how his past life had been, He was ready to embrace whatever came next. With a final, resolute sigh, Chung Myung lay down on his bed, letting the exhaustion of the journey finally catch up with him. He closed his eyes, a smile still playing on his lips, and drifted into a well-deserved rest. Episode 10. Oh my, Mount Hua is in ruins. Ah, the child? I sent him off to the dorms. We can just kick off the ceremony right away. Got it. Unam's eyes were locked onto the floor, like he was trying to find answers in the dirt. Hyunjong, ever the picture of serene wisdom, responded with a smile that could have been mistaken for a cryptic riddle. You don't seem to like this. Not so much don't like as don't get. Unam scratched his head, his sigh echoing his confusion. Why the kid? We should be cutting down on our expenses, not adding to them. And this kid's got zero martial arts talent. And let's not forget, he doesn't exactly radiate kindness. He's more like a black hole of charm. Why bring him into Mount Hua? Hyunjong's smile was still there, but it was now a bit more mysterious. Think so? Sect leader. Unam took another deep breath. After a decade of service, he still couldn't crack the mystery that was Hyunjong's mind. It was like trying to solve a Rubik's Cube while blindfolded. Unama. Yes, sect leader? Sometimes the most unexpected relationships can blossom. Hyunjong flashed a grin that suggested he knew something Unam didn't. Maybe this child is destined to be Mount Hua's beacon of hope? That child is about as likely to be Mount Hua's beacon as a snowflake is to start a fire. He could be. Hyunjong's face darkened with a seriousness that could make the sun seem dim. Mount Hua was in such bad shape it could have been a wind chime, barely hanging on, and nobody would be surprised if it fell. Unam didn't want Chung Myung to join because he worried about the kid being crushed by Mount Hua's current state. How much heartache would it cause Chung Myung if he joined only to be discarded immediately? All his struggles just to be tossed back onto the streets? I know the situation is grim. Hyunjong spoke with the weight of someone who's seen too many sunsets to care about the sunrise. But Unama, even in the coldest winters, plum blossoms can bloom. Those blossoms, despite the harshness, smell sweeter than those in milder seasons. If we stop planting seeds just because winter's here, we might lose the chance for those blossoms. Yes. Right, so go and see. As Unam closed the door, he shook his head in resigned frustration. Talking to Hyunjong was like trying to solve a complex puzzle. Each conversation left him more perplexed. Despite everything, Mount Hua's situation seemed irreversible. Hyunjong had given his all, but things only got worse. It was as if Mount Hua was nearing its end, and Unam's heart ached at the thought. Where is Mount Hua heading? Unam shut his eyes, lost in thought. Meanwhile, Chung Myung was eyeing his new white robe with disdain. The 5-petal plum blossoms stitched near his chest itched like they were woven from cat fur. No way! This is seriously itching me! The fabric felt like sandpaper against his skin. If he hadn't spent a month in rags, this might have been unbearable. At least his previous experiences as a beggar had toughened him up. Shh! Chung Myung scowled. Things have changed. Mount Hua wasn't rolling in money like the Wudang or Shaolin sects, but it had plenty stashed away. Back then, even if the treasury was guarded by Sahyung's greed, the disciples had decent clothes and good food. Now, the clothes were in tatters. What did they do with all the money? The treasury was probably overflowing, but instead of spending it wisely, they sold off valuable items and now dressed the kids like they were extras in a medieval disaster movie. Chung Myung took a deep breath. There's no straight path. The more he pondered, the more his head hurt. Anyway, I joined. He'd managed to get in. The worst possible outcome had come to pass. He was the youngest at Mount Hua. Not ideal, but at least he was part of the sect now. Sure, there were a ton of issues to address, but this was just the beginning of a long journey. Tackling problems one step at a time was usually the way to go. But where exactly am I? The place he was in used to be a hall, but now it was a dorm. Mount Hua hadn't had dorms back in his day. Newcomers lived with their master. So why was he here? I can't see this as just a temporary pit stop before moving to another master. He looked around the dorms, wondering if he was the only one there. The narrow hallway and rooms lined up on either side looked like they were meant for actual living. Am I the only one? Chung Myung stepped out of his room, only to be greeted by a mess of clothes and items scattered around. He wondered if anyone actually lived in these rooms. Who are you? Chung Myung turned, startled. He hadn't heard someone approaching. Oh, right. I forgot. I don't have martial arts now. He hadn't learned any martial arts since arriving at Mount Hua. His chi cultivation had only made his body stronger, but he couldn't do much more than gather a tiny bit of internal chi, nowhere near his former prowess. Who are you, you creep? Spying on others' rooms? A thief? A kid with a rough mouth and even rougher attitude stood there, glaring. Other kids appeared, joining the scene like a group of feral cats. What? Joe Ghoul. What's going on? The kid named Joe Ghoul pointed at Chung Myung. This guy was snooping around my room. Who is he? Looks like a newcomer? Chung Myung sighed and looked up at the ceiling, feeling like he was watching a tragic comedy. Why had he come back to life? Just to witness this mess? He was heartbroken to see how the new generation of Mount Hua's disciples had turned into noisy troublemakers. In his time, the disciples were disciplined and respectful. But now, the scene was more like a neighborhood gang with their insults and accusations. How was he supposed to reconcile this with the disciplined students he remembered? As he opened his mouth to address the unruly kid, someone yelled from behind. What's happening here? Ah! Teacher Unjiam. The children scattered like roaches in the light. A big guy came down the stairs, looking like he might trip over his own feet. Unjiam glanced around with sharp eyes that could cut through steel. Why are you all making a ruckus during training? Who gave you permission? No, it's just my uniform was dirty, so I came to get a change. How dare you make excuses? I'm sorry. The frightened children backed away, all eyes now on Chung Myung. You are? Chung Myung. You must be a new member of the White Plum Blossom Boarding House. White Plum Blossom Boarding House? This is the White Plum Blossom Boarding House. These are the dorms for Mount Hua's disciples. Didn't you hear about it? Dormitory? Unjiam's frown deepened. Don't you know to speak respectfully? Ah, yes, I apologize. Calm down. Damn it. Once again, he hadn't thought things through. The kids who hadn't even been born in his day were now masters. This is a mess. The teacher must be highly skilled to handle this, and Chung Myung was likely in for a rough ride. You too, come along. Yes? Whether you're early or late, you need to practice. Disciples shouldn't waste time. Chung Myung agreed with that. To turn Mount Hua around, he needed to strengthen himself fast. An environment focused on training was crucial. The only issue was that the martial arts they were teaching were basic and pointless for someone like him. Come. The man left, with the children trailing behind. One of them, Joe Ghoul, turned back. I'll see you tonight. I'll fix that head of yours. Sure, come. You really are. What are you doing? Joe Ghoul jumped at Ungiam's shout and scurried off. Chung Myung sighed, thinking, I need to be nice to them. They were the descendants of the sect, after all, but his idea of being nice was going to be a lot different from others. They deserve it. With that thought, Chung Myung moved forward, ready to face whatever came next. Chung Myung followed Unjiam and the other kids through the corridors, his mind racing. The dorms were a far cry from the grand halls and majestic training grounds he remembered. The current state of Mount Hua was more of a crumbling shadow of its former self. They arrived at the training grounds, where the air was filled with the sound of kids grumbling and trying to get into the swing of their routines. It wasn't the organized discipline he was used to, but rather chaotic and half-hearted efforts. Unjiam took his place at the front, his presence commanding attention. The students shuffled into their positions, their faces a mix of fatigue and annoyance. Let's start, Unjiam barked, his voice carrying a tone that left no room for argument. The training began, and Chung Myung tried to make sense of the drills they were doing. The techniques were rudimentary, almost laughable to someone with his experience. But he kept his mouth shut and followed along, not wanting to draw more attention. As the training session went on, Chung Myung's thoughts kept drifting back to the state of Mount Hua. The sect's decline was evident, and the current state of affairs was a stark contrast to the vibrant and powerful organization he had once known. After the session, the kids gathered around, exchanging tired but relieved glances. Joe Ghoul approached Chung Myung, a smirk playing on his lips. Hey, new guy, you better keep your head down if you don't want to get it knocked around. Chung Myung gave him a tired look. I'm just trying to get through this. Joe Ghoul shrugged. Whatever, Just don't get in my way. As the day wound down, Chung Myung found himself alone in his room again, contemplating his situation. The initial excitement of joining Mount Hua had faded, replaced by the harsh reality of the sect's decline. Despite the hardships, he resolved to make the most of his situation. Strengthening himself and finding a way to help Mount Hua recover was his new goal. The next day, he immersed himself in training with renewed determination. Every move was a step toward reclaiming the glory of Mount Hua. Chung Myung knew it wouldn't be easy, but he was ready to face whatever challenges came his way. The journey ahead was long and filled with obstacles, but he was prepared to tackle them head-on, one step at a time. And as he trained, he couldn't help but hope that, somehow, he would be able to restore Mount Hua to its former greatness.